I don't know if you've heard before the story about there was a man, he was driving in a parking lot looking for a spot, and he was circling and circling, and there was nothing there. He was getting desperate and desperate. So he turned finally, as we all do, right, in a time of need. The old expression, there are no atheists in foxholes. In a time of need, he turned to God. He looked up to the heavens as he sat in his car. God, if you find me a parking spot, I'll do anything. I'll go to shul every Shabbat. And not just at like 10:45, I'll get there early. I'll be there for the beginning of the service. If you help me find a parking spot, I will keep kosher. I will give tzedakah. I'll do anything. I'll even laugh at the rabbi's jokes and his sermons. Whatever it is you want, God, if I can get a parking spot, please. And what happens? At that very moment, right in front of him, a car starts to back out. So what does he do? Never mind, I found one. Our Parsha talks this week about making vows, oaths, promises. And traditionally, Judaism says don't. There are lots of different rules that go into making a vow. And it's a commandment to keep them. So the rabbis actually tell us we should not make them, because if we make a vow or a promise and we break it, we've violated a mitzvah, a commandment. And the truth is, we all do it. We all do it all of the time, both big ones and small ones, often unintentionally. But I know I myself am guilty sometimes of making promises that I don't keep. Every time I have a donut, I say to myself, this is the last one. Or the last dozen. Right? When I watch a show on Netflix, I say, you know what? I'm going to cut down on my Netflix. I'm going to start reading more. But then what happens at the end? The little timer comes up, counting down to the next episode. So you watch another. These are silly, small promises. Yet there are larger ones too. And if we're being honest, I imagine I am not alone. I'm not the only person who's ever made a promise and broken it. I imagine each of us could think of examples. And sometimes we do it to our family. Sometimes we do it to our friends. Sometimes we do it to our bosses or to people at work, our colleagues. Sometimes we do it to God. But what your promises are and who they're to, that might be different. But the truth is, I think, each and every one of us at some point breaks promises. We might feel guilty, but we justify it in different ways. Something big came up at work, or there was a big project at school, I wasn't feeling well. Sometimes I simply forgot, right? That's the answer. But then there are other promises we break. Sometimes we make promises knowing we're not really going to be able to follow through with them. Perhaps we weren't fully clear with what we were agreeing to. Perhaps we had a fear of saying no. We want to make others happy. It's easy to want to please someone and say, yes, I could do that. Sometimes it's self-delusion. We're lying to ourselves that we have the ability to do what we promised to do. And so that's what our parsha this week talks about. It tells us that if you make a vow to God, don't put off doing it. You have to do it. Not that you have to make a vow, but if you make a vow, you have to keep it. And so the rabbis tell us the solution is not to make vows. And yet we know no matter how hard we try, no matter how sincere we are when we make these vows, we're going to sometimes break them. And coming up in just a few weeks, we're going to stand here in the sanctuary and we're going to acknowledge that we all make vows and we break them. It's what our tradition recognizes when we recite Kol Nidre. On Erev Yom Kippur, right, the prayer that was in addition to the Erev Yom Kippur service and now has come to define that entire service, right? We don't call it the Erev Yom Kippur service, but we call it Kol Nidre. And we stand around reciting these words, singing these words, which aren't actually a prayer. What they are is a statement. They're written in Aramaic, and it's actually a legal procedure. We take out the Torah as witnesses as we recite it, saying, please, God, we annul the vows that we have made. We know we're not able to live up to all of our promises, all of our vows, so we ask as we enter Yom Kippur for you to annul them. Now it's interesting, in the Sephardic tradition, they ask God to nullify all of the vows that we've made last year, the ones that were being judged on this Yom Kippur for having made and having not fulfilled. But the Ashkenazi custom is actually very interesting. What do we say? Mi Yom Kippurim zeh ad Yom HaKippurim haba. We nullify vows we haven't even made yet. We ask God to nullify all of the vows and promises that I will make from this Yom Kippur until the next one. What does that mean, to nullify a promise before you've even made it? We admit right from the outset as we start the new year that it's not possible to keep our vows. We know we will make promises and we will break them. We know we will make vows and not live up to them. It's interesting, right? Kol Nidre is an addition to the service. The rabbis, actually, when it was first introduced as a piece, weren't big fans. They forbid people from saying it. Going all the way back to Rav Yehuda Gaon, the head of the Babylonian yeshiva in Sura in the 700s, he tells us, we do not ascribe to the custom of annulling vows on Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah. Almost a century later, one of his successors, Rav Neturnei Gaon, he said, we do not ascribe to this custom of reciting Kol Nidre anywhere in Babylonia. Rav Amram Gaon, a later head of the Great Academy, the author of the first Siddur, the compiler of the different prayers, he tells us Kol Nidre is a foolish custom. It's forbidden to say. Show me a single machzor that doesn't have Kol Nidre in it, right? The people loved this prayer. They loved this procedure. Even though the rabbis called it foolish, forbidden, it made it into our service as, for some people, the defining moment of the holidays. Because again, it goes to that central truth we all know. It plays on a universal human truth. None of us can live up to every promise we make. So the question is then, what is the solution? On the one hand, the solution is to say, please, here I am today nullifying all of the promises and vows that I make in advance, so I can make them willy-nilly, not thinking about them, knowing I can't be held liable because they're not really promises. Even if the person I make it to thinks that it is, I have an out. That's one solution. But what happens in that solution? If we can't trust each other, if we can't trust each other to keep their word, we really lose out on what makes us a society, what makes us a community. It's what created civilization, was the ability to not just live together, right? There are various animals in nature that do that, and they support each other, and they help each other to some degree. But what separates us, what allowed humanity to thrive and our societies to be built, was that we had trust in each other. That we believed when someone made a promise, they would keep it. That a person was as good as their word. And we see some of the problems in society today. There's so much mistrust. People don't trust each other. They don't trust their leaders. They don't trust the government. People don't trust the experts. And sometimes they have good reason to. Because time and time again, as a society, we've become more and more careless with our word, throwing it around as if we knew it was okay if we didn't keep our promise because we were annulling our vow. So what does our tradition tell us? It's right in our parsha this week. The lesson is refrain from making vows and you won't be guilty. It's not that we have this process to annul our vows so we can make them willy-nilly, not caring, not worrying about keeping our word and just be forgiven. The solution is to be more careful with our word. to try to make them more rarely. The truth is, we're all going to make promises at some point. We're all going to make promises that we can't keep, and that's okay. The question is, how do we approach it? Do we approach it with the mindset of, it's simply fine, I'm going to annul them in Yom Kippur anyway? Or for some people, they don't even care about annulling them in Yom Kippur. It's just accepted. This is what I'll say now, and I'll say something else tomorrow. If we want to rebuild our communities, if we want to rebuild our society and our world, we need to start making our words matter. We need to start making our vows, our promises, our oaths stand for something. So as we get ready for this Yom Kippur, as we get ready and we take inventory of ourselves, as we prepare for the new year, for the days of judgment, I want us to also prepare ourselves for Kol Nidre this year. As we prepare to say those words, to recite the beauty of the music, of that moment as we stand together before each other and God. To not just rely on that ritual. It's there if we need it. But maybe we should each be a little more careful, a little more dedicated in only giving our word, giving our promise when we can make it. Shabbat Shalom.